Every single thing you think you know about Christmas is wrong. December 25th. Not Jesus' actual birthday, not even close. Those beautiful traditions your family cherishes, straight from Roman pagan festivals, where people got drunk in the streets and slaves ordered their masters around. That peaceful, silent night in Bethlehem is a gorgeous story. But the real history of how Christmas ended up on December 25th involves political power plays, mathematical theology gone wild, and a Roman sun god nobody remembers anymore. For almost 300 years after Jesus died, Christians didn't celebrate his birthday. They thought birthday parties were for pagans and idol worshippers. So how did December 25th become the biggest holiday in the Western world? The answer takes us through wild Roman street festivals, a controversial emperor who worshipped the sun, some seriously strange math involving Jesus' death date, and one of the slickest religious marketing campaigns in human history. Let's start with what the Bible actually tells us. Basically nothing. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke tell the nativity story, but neither mentions a date for Jesus' birth. No month, no season, nothing. Mark and John don't even bother with the birth story at all. They jump straight to Jesus as a grown man starting his ministry. And here's the thing. Christians thought celebrating birthdays was a pagan custom. Romans threw birthday parties for their emperors and gods. Greeks lit candles on cakes for their moon goddess. Egyptians believed your birth date determined your entire future through astrology. To early Christians, all of that reeked of idolatry. They focused on death and resurrection instead. Easter mattered. Easter proved Jesus conquered death. That was the whole point of Christianity, not celebrating when someone was born, but commemorating when they rose from the dead. So for about 200 years, nobody celebrated Christmas. Nobody even tried to figure out when Jesus was born. Christians were too busy hiding in catacombs and trying not to get executed in the Colosseum to worry about birthday parties. But by the 3rd century, Christianity was growing fast, spreading across the Roman Empire, getting more organized, and Christians started getting curious about their founder. If Jesus was the Son of God, shouldn't they know more about him? Shouldn't they know when he was born? Different Christian communities started throwing out dates. March, April, May, November. One group even suggested January 2nd, but December 25th. That date wasn't even in the conversation yet. Nobody knew when Jesus was actually born because nobody had written it down. The people who knew him personally, the disciples, the early followers, they hadn't thought it mattered enough to record. Now, 2 centuries later, everyone was just guessing. Meanwhile, while Christians were scratching their heads trying to figure out Jesus' birthday, Romans were throwing the craziest parties of the ancient world every December. The main event was called Saturnalia, a festival honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture. Originally one day on December 17th. By the time of the Roman Empire, it had exploded into a full week of absolute mayhem. During Saturnalia, Roman society completely flipped upside down. Schools closed, courts shut down, work stopped. Gambling, normally illegal, was suddenly allowed everywhere. People wore casual dinner clothes instead of formal togas. They decorated their homes with evergreen wreaths and lit candles everywhere to celebrate the return of longer days after the winter solstice. But the wildest part is, slaves became the bosses. Seriously. For 1 week, enslaved people were served meals by their owners. They could speak freely without punishment. They could insult their masters to their faces without consequences. Households would elect a mock king called the Lord of Misrule, who would give absurd commands, making senators dance or forcing people to shout embarrassing confessions. The entire social order collapsed into joyful chaos. The Roman poet Catullus called Saturnalia the best of days. But not everyone was thrilled. The philosopher Seneca complained about the whole mob losing control in pleasure-seeking and described people vomiting in the streets from excessive drinking. Another writer, Pliny the Younger, was so overwhelmed by the noise and partying that he locked himself in his study and refused to come out. Saturnalia ran from December 17th to 23rd, ending with a day called Sigillaria, when Romans exchanged gifts, small wax figurines, candles, gag gifts. Sound familiar? We're still doing this exact same thing 2,000 years later, but Saturnalia wasn't the only winter festival Romans celebrated. There was also something happening on December 25th itself, though historians still argue about what exactly it meant. In the year 274, Emperor Aurelian established an official feast day honoring Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. On December 25th, Aurelian had just pulled the Roman Empire back together after it had literally fractured into 3 separate territories. He was desperate for something to unify his people, and he picked the sun god. Smart choice, right? Everyone sees the sun. Everyone needs the sun. The sun doesn't care if you're Roman, Syrian, or Egyptian. It shines on everyone equally. The festival was celebrated with 30 chariot races in Rome's circus. It marked the moment when daylight began returning after the winter solstice, when darkness started retreating. Perfect symbolism for an emperor trying to restore light and order to a chaotic empire. For decades, historians assumed this was the smoking gun. Obviously, Christians stole December 25th from the sun god festival, right? The church just took over a pagan holiday to make conversion easier. Open and shut case. Maybe not. This is where it gets really interesting. More recent scholarship suggests Christians may have been celebrating December 25th before Aurelian established his sun god festival, with evidence of the date appearing in Christian texts as early as the 2nd century. Some historians now think Aurelian might have chosen December 25th specifically because Christians were already using that date. Christianity was growing like wildfire in the 3rd century, becoming a real competitor to traditional Roman religion. What better way to fight back than to establish your own sun god festival on the same date Christians were celebrating? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The historical record is messy, incomplete, and full of gaps, but one thing is crystal clear. By the 4th century, both pagans and Christians were celebrating on December 25th, and these traditions were about to collide in ways nobody expected. So if Christians weren't just copying pagans, how did they land on December 25th? Get ready for some truly bizarre ancient Christian logic. Early Christians believed in something called the integral age theory. idea that important religious figures died on the same date they were conceived. Why? Because God creates things with perfect symmetry. Nothing is random. Everything follows divine mathematical order. Jewish tradition already held that. Prophets and patriarchs died on significant anniversary dates. Early Christians took this concept and ran with it to absurd lengths. They reasoned that Jesus, being literally the most important person who ever lived, must have been conceived on the exact same date he died. Most early Christians believed Jesus died on March 25th. Now, whether that's historically accurate doesn't matter, that's what they believed. So if Jesus was conceived on March 25th, you count forward 9 months for a normal pregnancy, and boom, December 25th. Augustine, one of the most influential Christian theologians ever, wrote explicitly about this calculation. Conception on March 25th, death on March 25th, birth on December 25th. The logic was theological, not astronomical. It wasn't about matching up with pagan festivals. It was about divine mathematics and cosmic perfection. Here's the kicker. Eastern Christians used a different date for Jesus' death. April 6th in their calendar Rand, therefore calculated his birth as January 6th. That's why some Orthodox churches still celebrate Christmas on January 6th today. Same bizarre logic, different starting date, different conclusion. The Roman historian Sextus Julius Africanus first made this calculation connecting March 25th to December 25th way back in 221. Add, these weren't Christians trying to steal pagan holidays, were theologians doing what theologians do, creating elaborate theories to explain divine mysteries, using whatever logic they could dream up. The first recorded official Christmas celebration in Rome happened in the year 336 AD. During the reign of Emperor Constantine, Constantine changed everything for Christianity. In 312 AD, he had a vision before a major battle where he saw a cross in the sky with the words in this sign, "Conquer, he won," attributed his victory to the Christian God, and gradually began transforming Christianity from a persecuted sect into the official religion of the Roman Empire. But here's what's wild. Constantine didn't immediately abandon all his pagan practices. For over a decade after his supposed conversion, he continued honoring Sol Invictus, the sun god. His coins showed both Christian symbols and images of the sun god side by side. He declared Sunday Dies Solis, the day of the sun, as the official day of rest. He built his monuments aligned with sun worship imagery. Constantine was hedging his bets, creating a religious hybrid that could appeal to both Christians and pagans. And choosing December 25th for Christmas fit perfectly into this strategy. Was it calculated appropriation of a pagan festival? Maybe, but remember, Christians had their own theological reasons for December 25th that predated Constantine. What Constantine did was make it official, turn it into an imperial holiday, and give it the full weight of state power behind it. The date didn't become universally accepted overnight. Eastern Christians kept celebrating on January 6th for decades. Some communities celebrated both dates. It took until the mid-4th century for December 25th to become the dominant date across most of the Christian world. The Church in Rome formalized December 25th partly because it worked politically. With Constantine's blessing, they could overlay Christian meaning onto a time when Romans were already partying. You're already celebrating in late December. Great. Now you're celebrating Jesus instead of Saturn or Sol Invictus. Same festive energy, different divine focus. It was brilliant religious marketing. What happened next was one of the most successful cultural transformations in human history. Christmas didn't replace pagan winter festivals, it absorbed them, blended with them, transformed them into something new. Look at what we do at Christmas today and compare it to Saturnalia. Saturnalia, decorate homes with evergreen wreaths. Christmas, exact same thing. Saturnalia, light candles everywhere to symbolize returning light. Christmas, candles, Christmas lights, strings of lights on every surface. Saturnalia, exchange gifts on the last day of the festival. Christmas, presents under the tree. Saturnalia, feast with family, drink heavily, party. Christmas, office parties, family dinners, spiked eggnog. Saturnalia, temporary suspension of normal social rules. Everyone be extra generous. Christmas, Season 2, be jolly. Forgive debts, be kind to strangers. The parallels aren't coincidence. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, converts didn't abandon their beloved winter traditions. They Christianized them. The wreaths that once honored Saturn now symbolized eternal life in Christ. The candles that celebrated the sun's return became symbols of Jesus as the light of the world. The gift-giving that honored Roman gods became commemoration of the Magi bringing gifts to baby Jesus. This process happened slowly. Over centuries, the early church was often uncomfortable with the rowdy, party-like atmosphere that persisted. Medieval Christmas celebrations could be downright pagan-drunk people in the streets, gambling, chaos. Puritans in colonial New England actually banned Christmas because they thought it was too much like paganism. Too much drinking, too much fun, not enough Jesus. But the momentum was unstoppable. People loved their winter festivals. They loved the break from work, the feasting, the gift-giving, the excuse to gather with family during the darkest, coldest part of the year. Christianity didn't kill these. Desires it, redirected them, gave them new meaning, wrapped them in new stories while keeping the same basic celebrations. The Bible itself suggests Jesus probably wasn't born in December at all. Luke's Gospel mentions shepherds watching their flocks by night when Jesus was born, and scholars point out that shepherds in Judea didn't keep their flocks outside during December. It was too cold and rainy. They brought the sheep into shelter during winter months. Shepherds watching flocks at night suggests spring, probably around lambing season in March or April also. Luke mentions that Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem because of a Roman census, requiring everyone to return to their ancestral hometown. Would Rome really conduct a census in the dead of winter? Forcing people to travel during the worst possible weather makes no sense. Census season was typically spring or fall, when roads were passable and weather cooperative. Some scholars have calculated that based on various dates mentioned in Luke's Gospel, Jesus was more likely born in late September or early October, possibly during the Jewish festival of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. But here's the thing, early Christians knew all this. They weren't stupid, when they chose December 25th. They knew they were picking a symbolic date, not a historical one. They were making a theological statement. Jesus is the light that comes into winter darkness. Jesus is the true, unconquered sun. Jesus brings life when death seems strongest. The date was never about historical accuracy. It was about meaning, symbolism, and let's be real, religious competition in a diverse Roman marketplace of gods and festivals. Let's talk about the politics. Because 4th century Christianity was playing to win. When Constantine legalized Christianity in 313 AD, he didn't just allow Christians to worship freely, he fundamentally shifted the religious landscape of the entire Roman Empire. Suddenly the persecuted sect was becoming a power player. Church leaders had access to imperial resources, political influence, and the emperor's personal attention, but most Romans were still pagan. They'd worshipped Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, and Sol their whole lives. Their families had followed these gods for generations. You couldn't just snap your fingers and order millions of people to abandon their traditions and adopt completely foreign ones overnight. So church leaders did something brilliant. They made Christianity as familiar as possible. Keep your winter celebrations, but now they're about Jesus. Keep your feast days, but now they honor Christian martyrs instead of pagan gods. Keep your sacred sites, but now we'll build churches on top of them. Choosing December 25th for Christmas was part of this larger strategy. The church was essentially saying to Romans, you already love this time of year. You already celebrate the return of light, the hope after darkness, the joy of midwinter feasting. We're not taking that away. We're showing you that Jesus is what you've been celebrating all along without knowing it. He's the real light. He's the real hope. He's the meaning behind everything you've been doing. It was genius. Instead of creating conflict by demanding Romans abandon their beloved traditions, Christianity absorbed and transformed them. The transition from paganism to Christianity happened not through erasure, but through reinterpretation. Same party, new meaning. This wasn't unique to Christmas, by the way. All Saints' Day got placed on November 1st, right around the Celtic festival of Saturnalia. Easter's symbolism, rabbits, even the name come from spring fertility festivals. Christianity spread by meeting people where they were culturally and gradually shifting the meaning underneath familiar forms. By the 9th century, Christmas had become a major Christian festival across Europe, but it looked very different from the Christmas we know today. Medieval Christmas was still pretty wild, closer to Saturnalia than to our modern version. It was a season of misrule when social hierarchies temporarily flipped. Lords served meals to their servants. Special plays dramatized biblical stories but also mocked church authorities. A boy bishop would be elected to ridicule authority for the day. Heavy drinking, gambling, and rowdy behavior were expected and encouraged. The Puritan backlash against this carnival atmosphere led to Christmas being banned in parts of England and colonial America in the 1600s. Massachusetts actually made celebrating Christmas illegal from 1659 to 1680. You could be fined 5 shillings for keeping Christmas. Puritans correctly recognized that most Christmas traditions had pagan roots and that the rowdy celebrations had almost nothing to do with Jesus, that it wasn't until the 1800s that Christmas began transforming into the family-centered child-focused holiday we recognize today. Writers like Charles Dickens reinvented Christmas as a time of charity, family, and generosity. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert popularized the Christmas tree. The modern image of Santa Claus emerged from Dutch traditions, a poem, and eventually Coca-Cola advertising. Each generation remade Christmas in its own image, adding new layers of meaning and tradition. The holiday kept evolving, kept absorbing new cultural influences, kept changing to fit changing times. It never stopped transforming. So what's the actual truth about Christmas and December 25th? The truth is messy. It's complicated. It's not a simple story of Christians stealing a pagan holiday. It's not a pure religious celebration untouched by worldly concerns. It's a fascinating blend of theology, politics, cultural borrowing, bizarre mathematical theories, and religious competition.